we're gonna record it. Okay. Just because all of these will be uploaded. I'm still figuring out where I want to upload it. That's for neither here nor there, but for the people that are not here, and if there's ever a time you guys want to come back to the material or a week you don't, you aren't able to make it, that will be available for you. Okay. Perfect. Let's hop in. I'm gonna share my screen. So let me see what happens when I hit play. Oh, I can still see you guys. Perfect. Okay. When I did it earlier, I was a little concerned. Um, so the way that at least these Tuesdays are going to be structured for the 9 weeks, what we're going to do today is kind of like a general roadmap. Weeks 2, 3, and 4, we're going to deep dive into some concepts that are presented in here simply because of time and the amount of information. I don't want to bombard people with things at once. So what we're going to cover today is the stress response system. We're going to really look at the paradox within it because we're taught one thing, but there's so much minutia within it that you'll see as we go. Some of the things we've been taught how to work with actually are us working against it. So we're going to cover this today, weeks 2, 3, and 4. Like I said, we'll go into some very like deep dive of certain aspects within here, like how ATP is generated. We'll really go deep dive into the various aspects of the nervous system, how our senses actually take in information through perceptions. And then the fourth week, we'll actually look at a different view of our body through like an energetic lens, different subtle bodies, so that we can really connect the energetic with the physical. And then weeks 5 through 9 are actually going to be looking at various inputs that work with or against this stress response cycle. So each week will be something different, but it will all be tied into what we cover the first 4 weeks. I'll still give you guys things each week as far as like how you can work with it. So don't think, you're not getting any of that built in through this. I do want this to be very experiential as we go. So if you have questions, feel free, ask if there are things. We do have office hours on Friday, so I'm happy to take questions during the call. But if things come up for you after, please write them down. I'm also going to be sending out an email just with the links to the folders where the recordings are. And then I've created a Google Drive or a Google Doc where if you're not able to make it to an office hour on Friday and you want to upload questions for that office hour, you're welcome to. Let's say there's a week, you're behind on the material, so engage with week 2, week 3, or week 4, still ask those questions because all of this stuff is going to tie together at the end. So feel free at any point to ask any questions. But today we're going to dive into the stress response. And funny enough, actually, a client yesterday, at the beginning of our session, was like, well, what is stress? And I kind of had to take a moment and was like, there's a lot of different responses to that, right? So when we talk about stress from this standpoint, there's going to be a separation between stress and trauma, especially as we go through these learnings. Stress is going to be a general response to some type of pressure or challenge. So maybe trying to fit a bunch of things into the day, right? Or maybe there is something that is presented in front of you that you're not 100% certain how to move through, but it's not a lion, it's not a tiger, it's not a overwhelming stressor from the environment. And we'll actually talk about trauma in a couple slides because the definition of trauma has recently changed. So prior to 1980 in the DSM-3, it actually used to be a physical injury, and that's all it was. So it's relatively recent that trauma has become more of a, or viewed, I should say, as a disorder, as a overwhelming experience that happens in the body due to an environmental stressor. So the category of it has actually broadened, and we'll get into some DSM stuff in a little bit because it's not all we think it is. But yeah, for the purpose of today, looking at stress not as trauma, but looking at it as a general response to pressure or challenge, and then we'll go into trauma as well in a minute. And you can't see her, but she just joined us. Sweet little girl. Are either of you familiar with the ACEs study? No? Yes. Okay. So adverse childhood experiences, Kaiser and the CDC did this research probably back in like, I want to say the mid to late 80s. And one of the biggest findings of it was the more adverse childhood experiences you experience, you're going to have more negative health outcomes later in life. The one thing they really don't speak to is all the metabolic stuff that I'm going to highlight through this. What they looked at specifically, though, for adverse childhood experiences are these ones on the bottom. So experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home, having a family member attempt or die by suicide, substance use, mental health, housing instabilities, parents in jail or other family members in jail. I'm curious from you guys, is there anything on this list? Because this actually, when I first started working as an associate, I was working in the jails and I was working with 15 to 22-year-olds specifically on this, like collecting data to be able to provide to the city of San Francisco to basically build more infrastructure to support transitional age youth, knowing these past experiences. So I, for about a year and a half, really, really dove into this stuff, but I didn't have the lens that I have now. And when I look at this list, if this is trauma, like what else is missing? Because there's actually a ton of stuff missing. So whether that's war or even, with the availability of social media now, right? And just like how somebody can record something and put that online, right? There's really no language of even vicarious trauma, right? First responders, nurses, again, seeing something that's not happening in your home, right? Or your local area, but still being exposed to it visually speaking. You could even put certain movies or video games, or you know what I mean? Like we're just exposed to so much culturally and within our society that this list is not exhaustive whatsoever. So just something to consider. I'll probably make a document at the end of each lecture and just put links to different things. So if you want to dive in, if you were to Google adverse childhood experiences, there's a beautiful TED Talk by Nadine Harris, who used to be the Surgeon General of California. Again, really, she used this information to help build local clinics and different things of that nature to support the community with these aspects in terms of assessment and what's the word that I'm looking for? Preventative measures, preventative, more health than anything. I'm blanking on the term that I'm looking for. I apologize. But really being able to, she says in the video, if 100 kids come in, right, and they say that they've all drank from the same water fountain, I can either write them prescription for antibiotic, or I can actually go over to this water fountain and be like, what is in this water? Right. So there's just this very different, lens that we get to take. But we'll come back to this throughout too, because again, if adverse childhood experiences are as prevalent as they are, and again, this list doesn't include a lot of the things that are stressors in our day-to-day life, what aren't we seeing that's still impacting this, right? Especially on a physiological level. So I'll throw some links in at the end for this stuff. I really love this quote from Vanderkolk because when we get into a couple slides, what we've kind of been taught about this, right? The effects of trauma are stored in the body until they are addressed. Their words alone are not enough. What I'm going to show you in a couple slides is not at all what we've considered trauma in the body to be, or at least how I've been taught to look at it. And I think other people have been taught to look at it. So hold this in mind because as we go, that's literally what we're going to be doing and learning these things as far as how these innate systems of the body actually work. And while we're on this slide, I should probably emphasize as we go through this, one of the things that I'm going to ask you guys to hold to be able to see what's presented is the notion that your body only knows healing. It only knows how to work with you, right? So even if we end up with experiences that we don't like, it's part of an innate cycle response based on what it's being given or not being given, right? So again, that idea of disorder, looking at things as wrong or bad, pathologizing, we're going to remove a lot of that stuff because when we can really begin to see the systems for what they are and have that recognition of like, wow, my body is detoxing 24/7 and I don't even need to know logically that these systems are working in the way that they're working for them to do it. I just need to trust that this thing is going to literally keep the spirit in me alive in a sense, right? And I put that word in quotes for reasons we'll go into later. Um, but ultimately, right, if we can take care of the vessel that we are living in, right, we can address these pieces on that cellular level. It's just there's a lot of freedom in it. So some things I just wanted to talk about with the DSM. So the DSM-3 was created in 1980, and actually this is where one of the biggest shifts culturally happened because all of the language shifted from response or reaction to disorder. So think about that. How much different would your experience be if you heard reaction or response instead of the word disorder? Night and day. When you even break down the etymology of the word disorder, right? There's this notion or this belief that like something is out of order when actually that response is perfectly in order again with what it's being given. So there's a number of reasons that, the DSM shifted some of this stuff. There were a lot of things going on as far as wanting to move away from psychodynamic theory, really allowing psychiatry to have more of a standardized medical practice. One of the books we're going to be reading for May is actually Anatomy of an Epidemic from a gentleman named Robert Whitaker, and he highlights all of that. So we'll be going into that in book club in a couple of months. Again, this clinical utility where being able to identify symptoms regardless of the practitioner's theoretical orientation. But one of the biggest things that it also allowed for was more of a categorical classification. So now we can pull insurance. Now we can pull in these criterias that allow us to look at basically, again, a diagnosis and a treatment model instead of looking at underlying aspects of what is actually happening. There's a huge shift from, looking at external to moving to internal. And I don't necessarily mean internal as far as looking at, right, the metabolic components of the stress response cycle, but what are you feeling? What's coming up for you, right? Rather than what are you engaging in your day to day? What are you exposed to? What's happening in your environment? We'll talk about it many slides down, but the nervous system, your central nervous system, which is your spinal column and your brainstem, not your full brain, but your brainstem, take in 11 million to 1 billion bits of information every second, where the brain itself only takes in 10 to 50. So there's a huge discrepancy in just that taking in of information that a model like this is going to really X out all of that central nervous stuff. So that's what we're going back to. Um, again, we've been taught to cognize stress when stress is actually built in our nervous system. I guess that stuff is on this slide. My bad. I thought it was way farther down. Um, so just for a demonstration, I want you guys just to close your eyes and move that gaze externally to internally. And if you were to hold in your awareness that that nervous system, your spinal column and your brainstem are taking in roughly 11 million bits of information per second. I'm not asking you to notice what that information is, but what do you see living within you, knowing the innate intelligence of the ability of your inner workings to receive that and your brain not needing to know all of it? How much power, how much greatness. You know, they say there is a universe within all of us. Consider that for a second. All of this information that's moving, all of these various systems that we're going to go through over the next couple weeks are literally its own universe. That is freaking powerful. Do you guys want to share anything, image or anything that you guys notice? I know both of you have done tapping, so in experiences like this, it never surprises me if things pop up.
Yeah, for me, it was just like a super like bright light, just like coming from my spine, from my back, just like it's very like I don't know. I've been kind of tapping into that whole concept of like the universe is in me, like to begin with. So I think I don't know. I just keep having these situations, whether it's in this talk or in yoga or whatever, where like that fact just keeps getting reiterated. So yeah, it's definitely something I have never even thought to think before, um, but makes so much sense now. So. I love it.
I love that. I had the same experience. I just seeing like just a galaxy within me. And I think something I've talked to Megan about before is just like I think we've been conditioned to seek externally for answers. And like a lot of the answers we either intuitively know or they just live within us. And so I think when I was like going inside and kind of reflecting, it's like even though we might not know it on a conscious level,
Yeah.
there's so much that our like bodies hold and know. And just the wisdom of that, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Well, and being okay, just letting our bodies know that and not having to like think about it all the time too.
Mhm. Yep. We'll get into it, that specific layer in week 3 and 4 because our central nervous system also connects to our gut and our heart space. And so this brain is not the only brain we have, but it is the brain that we are taught to use the most. Right. So what experience
Listen to.
would we have? Yeah, exactly. What experiences would we have if we actually listened to the heart or we actually listened to the gut and we went in alignment with that instead of the mind? And I'll hold a couple pieces for uh, the fight or flight response because, or I'll come back to it, I should say, because even when we recognize information in those two places, but choose to think or act in a different way, we automatically activate our HPA axis, which is going to make us have consistent low grade cortisol, which means we have consistent low grade inflammation in the body. And you'll see as we go through in a couple slides, it that low grade cortisol is not just fight or flight. There's so many other things that are coming into that fight or flight response that again, when we look at stress and trauma, they're very different. Stress can be trauma. I'm sorry, trauma is stress, but not all stress is trauma. Excuse me. Um, One thing I just want to highlight on this last piece, again, while we're most familiar with that fight or flight response, um, that overactive nervous system due to trauma, again, there's multiple metabolic pathways. And so what I mean by metabolic is the process of converting energy. You're going to hear me say that a lot throughout all of this today and over the next couple of weeks because this is going to be one of those concepts that you're going to keep coming back to, and it's not just going to land here, it's going to land here, it's going to land in your gut. And each time you revisit it, there's going to be a new lens or a new layer where it's like, oh, because the way we've been taught about metabolism again is like you're digesting food, right? But because energy can't be created and it can't be destroyed, it's always in transmission, right? That's I think that's literally the first law of thermodynamics. So when we talk about even mitochondria in a couple slides, it's not creating energy in the function of what it does. It's allowing processes to happen in that place and then moving that to something else. So this energy is always going to be moving and flowing in a variety of different ways. So I just want to highlight that language, and I'll come back to that multiple times as we go. So before we dive in, this is kind of what we've been taught. And what I mean by that is we've been taught to break things down. We've been taught separation, even the skeletal structure, right? We've been taught just to look at the bones, right? I remember being in like a bio or a chemistry class having one of those, and it's like, oh, your bones are dead, right? Even this nervous system, this breakdown, it's missing the enteric nervous system, your central nervous system here. It's showing the brain, and it's not the whole brain. It's literally just the brain stem, which is your animal brain. Your central nervous system does not include your limbic system. It does not include your prefrontal cortex. We're taught parasympathetic and sympathetic is this like on-off switch, right? We also have, when we pull in polyvagal in a couple weeks, you're going to see the various ways that we can be in different states. And this sympathetic actually has other responses to it. So again, we're taught this on off. These are here's this one piece, we can take it out, put it back in, kind of situation, when in all reality, we are so much greater and so much more expanded than we even think possible. So when we get into week 4, we'll go over the subtle bodies, we'll go over the chakras, but just again, that idea of being the universe, right? The earth has an electromagnetic frequency. It has a field around it. Scientifically speaking, the ratio of our electromagnetic field, because our heart is not just a pump that moves blood through our body, we are literally electrical utility transmitters, like we produce energy. Our electromagnetic field is the same ratio of the Earth's electromagnetic field. So the size of the Earth to its electromagnetic field is the same ratio of our physical body to our electromagnetic field. And so when we pull in these hermetic laws of nature, right, as above, so below, these laws of this law of correspondence, it's the second of 7, which are in the Google Drive for people listening. And if you need access to that, shoot me an email. When we really start to look at these natural laws, again, there are just these frameworks that help us support unlearning what we have historically learned about ourselves, right? That's going to keep us in this very limited medical models, systems, infrastructure of capitalism, society, however you want to look at it. When in actuality, we have so much more potential and so much more expansion and so much more growth and limitless available to us. And this is everything that we're gonna cover. So what's traditionally taught when it comes to that fight or flight is the amygdala senses a threat in the environment. This part is not what is taught, but it's like the amygdala senses a threat, fight or flight kicks in. We have these physiological responses, accelerated heart rate, blood flow, blood pressure, blood sugar. We'll get to that next week. The two axes that come together, but we connect as one, are SAM and HPA. So SAM is the sympathetic adrenomedullary, which basically activates adrenaline. The HPA, excuse me, is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, which releases cortisol. They're going to run together, cortisol and adrenaline, in the fight or flight response. Like this shouldn't even say stress response. This should say fight or flight response. And all those systems at the bottom, we will, well, I shouldn't say all of them, but especially the glycogen to glucose we'll cover in depth next week. SAM is always going to happen with HPA, but HPA can happen on its own. So I go back to that idea of stress versus trauma, right? Because when we're in trauma, we're in real fight or flight. When that bear is literally sitting in front of us, we're going to have that trigger. We're going to have that response. We want that resolution, that fight flight movement, the moving away of, especially from a reflex level, is to get us away from the threat in some way, shape, or form. Right. So that adrenaline, that cortisol is going to support that through those variety of physiological responses, because we don't need to digest food right now. We don't need to think about the actual response that's happening, right? Our prefrontal cortex actually goes down because I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do. My body is literally just going to do it, which is the beauty of the innateness, right, of these systems and responses. If you have time to think about what you're going to do, it's more than likely it's your HPA that's online, which means it's just your cortisol. So then you're in a stress response, but you're not quite in fight or flight yet. What tends to happen, so again, trigger, we sense it in the environment, nervous system's going to respond. In that response, again, there's an engagement or an actual moving away from, which lets the resolution happen. Example of that, we had family in town over the weekend, and when we were packing everyone up on Sunday, we had the front door open, and our dog booked it out and literally ran all the way to the road. Like, she ran after some kids on a scooter or something like that, which she has never done before. And so my partner grabbed her, brought her inside, and I went to put her in the crate. And when she got out of the crate, I was trying to like talk to her, kind of like hold her for a second. I was the threat, because even when she was coming back inside, she was like, Mom's mad at me. Like, she jumped in the Jeep. She tried to run outside. She's like, I'm going to get in trouble right now. I don't want that. She comes out of the crate. She walks away from me, right? That's the resolution. She needs to get away from the threat. She shook, came right back to me. So something we've kind of been conditioned, especially with children, right? Or just other people. It's like, don't walk away from me. Right. But in reality, our body is literally meant to walk away from you. I need to get away from the threat so that my body can recognize its safety, and then I can come back and re-engage. Because if I don't have that ability to walk away, I'm not completing this response cycle, which you'll see as we go. That's where the paradox happens. So again, that system gears us for self-protection through that activation, mobilization, movement, return to safety, but we don't mobilize in the way that we need to. And so again, I just want to pull in that removing of cause that the DSM-3 did, right? If we change response and reaction to symptom, what happened to the cause, right? What's in the environment? What's the thing, rather than, instead now what we're looking at is how is what's happening within you wrong or bad. So one of the things I do want to highlight, how are we at for time? We're pretty good. And I just mentioned this already, that HPA axis can be activated without SAM, right? So through chronic, even just like low intrusive stressors, anticipatory psychological stressors, even dietary or movement changes that don't require an immediate fight or flight response, it can still activate HPA. And so when we have cortisol that is consistently running through the body, we're creating oxidative stress. And this oxidative stress, which is also known as reactive oxygen species, is going to be this basically imbalance between these free radicals, which are highly reactive, unstable atoms, and the body's ability to detox them. So think about your detox centers, right? Just kind of being overwhelmed with too much stress, right? ROS, oxidative stress, and there's not enough resources available to take them out. It's like if all of us, took out our trash on the same day and every city did trash pickup, right? Would they actually be able to clear everything in the same day because of the amount of employees or infrastructure, whatever's available, right? Take that on a cellular level and consider that. So when we have that imbalance and that excess production, what actually happens is cellular damage. which means we have damage to our DNA, our mitochondria, different proteins, lipids. We'll get into the next slide. That's basically cellular components. And if those cellular aspects break down, the function of those cellular aspects break down, right? So again, going back to that idea of if everything within us is a universe and everything has purpose and everything runs with nature, every single aspect of us is needed. There's no pop quiz. You don't need to know what each thing does. I will go over them in the next slide and I'll go back and forth because even I don't have them fully all memorized. But you know, your mitochondria here, oh, I don't have a scroller, so never mind. I was trying to go over it. So your mitochondria is going to be, like I said, where that ATP is generated. It's going to be kind of the temporary storing house. I don't like the language for that because it's not storing anything. It's transporting it to every part inside the cell. So if you look at this photo on the right, actually to start with, you'll see that cell membrane, right? The outer protective area, that cell body, if you see the word soma, that is the inner side of this picture on the left. So if we cut that cell open, the nucleus is what's in red over there. But all of those systems and functions are the soma. So even when you start hearing words like somatic healing, right, or traumas in the body, this is what we're talking about on a very cellular level. Where is there a breakdown in the innate energetic communication of our 37 trillion cells talking to each other? What stress response cycles are happening? Yes, we can release trauma out of the body, but what we've kind of been taught in a very, you know, new age way is like have these very cathartic emotional releases, but don't change anything in your day to day. And what if the things in your day to day are actually causing an imbalance in how these things are operating? Do you have trauma still, or are you just under a lot of stress? Right. So going back to that quote from Vanderkolk at the beginning, right? We need to address it in the body. We literally need to address it in the cell body. That's where it has to be interconnected. The axon is going to be going back to that picture to the right. The axon is just going to be how this information within this cell communicates to another cell. So that information is going to run down the axon. That myelin sheath is basically this protective layer that keeps that information moving and functioning. When that starts to break down the information as it goes to the axon terminal, technically there would be another cell or multiple cells, right, that will then connect to those other dendrites at the top. And that's how electrical information gets passed. Next slide again is just those basic components. So we talked about the cell membrane, that cytoplasm, I'll go back, is going to support glucose turning into ATP. So all of that jelly-like blue in the middle. The nucleus is where that DNA is going to be stored. So that's actual information for our development, survival, reproduction. I think both of you were in the class 2 weeks ago. One of the images that I got, I'm not putting too much thought into it because I don't like to put thought into the images, as I've shared a lot with people. Just because it guides us in ways that if we put, you know, certain language to it, we might lose the emphasis of it. But I saw the double helix of the DNA literally turn into two serpent snakes, and those snakes are Kundalini energy. Basically, it's the Shiva and the Shakti. So even this DNA, right, has ancestral wisdom, has this innate knowing, right, that Kundalini is representative of. And the endoplasmic reticulum, if we go back kind of around the DNA, this helps with lipids, proteins, calcium storage, detoxification. Again, we'll really break some of those pieces down next week as we dive into ATP and the importance of lipids and proteins. We might even highlight that in a couple of weeks when we talk about nutrition and just really wanting to make sure that we have enough protein in the day because of how that protein is synthesized to help support ATP. Let's see, lysosome, ribosomes. What I do want to hit is that Golgi apparatus piece because it's going to serve, as it says, as a post office for transport. So I want to use my little scroller and I can't, but down at the bottom, that is going to be part of the cell that helps move information from cell to cell to cell, right? So again, all of this is metabolic. I go back to that conversion of energy because that is the emphasis of metabolism. It's not just the digestion of food and breaking those pieces down. That's a part of it, right? But for all of these pieces to interact, for all of these individual aspects to come together as a whole and support each other, that interaction, right? When we talk about it takes a village, that interaction between every single person is metabolic energy, because this information from this cell is going to move to the next and the next, and whatever is received, there's going to be an output for that based on whatever the function of that cell is, right? If it's detox, if it's heart, if it's liver, if it's brain, whatever it is. So again, I mentioned, I'm going to come back to metabolism a lot, because as we go through these things, I'm not going to quiz you on this stuff like, what is this? What is this? But if you just hold in that awareness, like, wow, all of this stuff comes together to support the movement of energy into another form of energy for something, everything becomes important. Everything is vital. It's all necessary. Again, 37 trillion cells, galaxy unto itself within us. So we're going to touch on ATP just for a second, maybe 2 slides. Adrenoside triphosphate. So again, it's created in the mitochondria. And I don't like that word created, but it's generated through a variety of processes that will go in next week. But it's used as energy by organisms in daily operations, and literally is needed every single second by cells. So even as we are here right now, right? Even if you at the end of the day are laying down or getting ready to go to sleep, you're still utilizing energy, right? There's still going to be systems that occur even when you're sleeping that need this. So glucose can come from food. Again, we'll highlight some food aspects probably like week 6 or 7, I think. We'll talk about gluconeogenesis next week a little bit, because glucose doesn't just have to come from food. There are ways that the body can tap into reserves, particularly like with ketosis, right? And that's one of the 3 things that we'll highlight next week, in which ATP is created. And so when we are in that active fight or flight arousal, sympathetic arousal, excuse me, glucose is going to be delivered. If you remember going back to this slide here at the bottom, liver converts glycogen to glucose because that glucose needs to be mobilized in order to let our muscles have the available energy to get us away from the thing. But what happens if we don't convert the energy? What happens if we don't mobilize it, right? What if that threat is not immediately resolved? What if it's not really a threat, right? And so I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but this is kind of where that discernment aspect for each person is going to come into play, because only you are going to be able to be the master of you in an environment, right? Only you are going to be able to access that inner knowing within yourself. So being able to discern within yourself, was that fight or flight, or is this low grade cortisol? Is this a threat that is truly a threat and I need to move away from? Or is this stress that I also need to move away from, right? Am I pushing through, meaning maybe my body is saying step away from this, but I'm saying no, I have to engage with it, right? So again, even that contradiction, and we spoke about that at the beginning, if your body's like, get me the heck out of here, and your brain's like, no, 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 they're fine, don't worry about it, they're fine. Now we're consistently creating this low grade cortisol, and because we are literally not getting up, the movement doesn't have to be you sprinting down the street. I mean, my dog walked away like 2-3 feet from me. She didn't go very far. You may not need to go very far, right? But it's that literal activation of resolution, because if we don't give ourselves that, we're just going to keep cycling, right? That resolution's never going to happen. And so inevitably, if we push through that stress, or we don't allow the body, the nervous system to come into that equilibrium, what actually happens is we create more ROS. So that same system, right, that's creating this stress response that ideally we mobilize and move away from and discharge. If we don't, now we just have more ROS. We have more impact on the functioning of mitochondria and all of those cellular pieces, that as those things consistently happen over time, we're going to have inevitable wear and tear of the body. So even thinking about, right, like how often do we sit in traffic? And I know I'm guilty of this. We sit in traffic and we don't pull over to take breaks. Or like when I've driven from Southern California up to the Bay and it's like a 6-hour drive, I'm like, I don't need to stop for gas. It's not about gas. It's literally about getting up and moving, because we're not supposed to sit for that long straight, right? We're not supposed to sit in front of a computer for that long straight. We're not, there's just so many ways that we're taught to live that actually go against this entire system, or systems, I should say, within us. And so again, as those levels of ROS increase, that cellular damage is going to continue to have damage, which is going to continue to trigger that HPA axis to keep producing cortisol. And that cortisol is going to keep yielding further ROS, which is just going to have this feedback loop. And once we engage in that consistent feedback loop, one of the things, especially from a mental health standpoint, that we see, and there's research for this, rumination of thoughts. That energy's got to go somewhere, right? So if we're not able to actually get up and move away from the thing, now we're going to literally, because our body works from a bottom down front, or back front, excuse me, the way we think about something actually comes last. It is fully dependent of how we feel in the body. Traditionally, CBT therapy, we're taught how we think influences how we feel, and that then influences what we do. And that is not it at all. The environment gives us information into our physiology that moves up our spinal column to our brainstem. If there's any immediate threat that needs to happen, it will. If not, it's going to move to the midbrain, which is where certain emotions, even that HPA axis as a whole, will be taken in. And then boom, prefrontal cortex, where we're putting thought, meaning, logic to the thing. And the caveat to that is our prefrontal cortex can only put in information that it knows. So if we've never been taught any of this, how are you going to know? Right? How are you actually going to be able to say, like, oh, these things, right? How about that? I didn't see that. No, you're going to put it to something that you know is in front of you, right? Like, my boss is an asshole, and maybe they are, right? Or, I didn't eat today, and maybe you didn't, right? But if you don't know something, you're not able to actually pull that information out, because the brain, especially that prefrontal, is going to default to default mode network, which is just what we know. It's what we've been taught. So this whole 9 weeks is going to be learning to unlearn things. So yeah, that rumination of thoughts, you're going to potentially experience that because of that chronic cortisol yield, right? What you feel in the body, that turnover, your thoughts are just going to do the exact same thing. And I love this because as I was thinking about this the other day, I was like, oh, what do we call it? We call it burnout. I'm burnt out. I want to go on vacation. Don't get me wrong, everybody should. But what a different way of looking at it, right? Rather than saying I'm burnt out, and literally the definition of burnout, I wrote this down in my notes. Excuse me, let me find it. I went to I'm going to do a separate training on this at another point. But I went to Eat 'em online and I looked up the word burnout. 1590, burn until the fuel is exhausted. That fuel is literally ATP. It is energy. I have shivers literally as I say that. So we're taught, right? This like honeymoon phase, stress comes, then we have chronic, then we have the burnout, then we have the habitual burnout, right? Because we literally are engaging in whatever day to day that we've been taught is normal, but literally goes against the innate physiology that helps us create energy to put us back in that honeymoon phase, right? So we think if I change my job, if I change this, if I change that, we're good. And maybe to some degree, right? That can absolutely play a role depending on how that influences and changes your lifestyle. But a lot of the time when we hit phase 4 and 5, it's not about just changing a location or an environment. It's about changing numerous factors to be able to refuel and replenish and let the body move back to what it needs to do. And that stuff doesn't happen overnight. It happens with consistent changes over the long term, which again, we'll get into in those last weeks. Yeah, I just thought that was amazing. And I want to tie this in simply because this, well, this is kind of what started my journey, but taking into account then, bigger picture of pharmaceuticals and corporations and things like that. When we have this chronic stress in the body, one area of concern is actually the thyroid. And we'll probably go into more deeper thyroid functioning. I've got another slide or two, but we might do that in a couple other weeks. But this high cortisol is going to suppress thyroid function, right? So when people even go into the doctors and they're like, something's not right, they're like, all your labs are normal, right? Maybe it just hasn't gotten to a point that the lab can register, but what you're sensing is actually a function that's not producing at the vital capacity that it can, and it wants to, right? Levothyroxine, it depends on the link you pull. I've seen it listed as the first, the second, and the third, but it is in the top 3 most prescribed medications in the United States, and approximately 21 to 23 Americans take it. And this is a medication that they say you have to be on every single day for the rest of your life. So 21 to 23 Americans take it. Multiply that by 4, and that's how many prescriptions typically get filled in a year. It's insane. I'll leave that there. Yeah, so again, we'll see another paradox here because that thyroid gland is the body's master metabolism regulator. Metabolism, again, does not mean digestion of food, and it's going to produce, it's going to help with hormone production, T3, T4. Those get picked up by other cells and converted into whatever that cell needs. Again, we'll probably go into some deeper aspects of that later. But the thyroid really does impact how every cell converts oxygen and nutrients into energy. And when we go into ATP and breath next week, you'll see how important oxygen actually is. And we'll do some breath work in next week's class as well. But ultimately, just again, to consider, right? If the hormones that are needed to convert oxygen and nutrients into energy aren't available, thus there's less energy in the body, how do you think that's going to impact the brain? Even when I was in school, this was one of the things they said, rule out for depression, anxiety, all the other things. And it's like, okay, but if everybody has this and we need to rule it out instead of these things, maybe this is actually it, right? And I'm not saying this is it from a diagnosis, thyroid, take this medication. But again, when we see this full picture, it's such a different invitation. Another paradox here. So the hypothalamus is going to manage a lot of those innate pieces, thirst, hunger, blood temperature, sex drive, etc. It does play a role in releasing TRH, which prompts the pituitary gland, which if you recall is part of that HPA axis, right, to produce TSH, which then allows the thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4 again. You're not getting pop quiz or graded on any of this stuff. I just want to highlight, right, the way that energy moves. These various parts of the brain. What we've been taught is like, this thing does this, this thing does this, this thing does this, right? When in actuality, all of these things come together as one. They are all important. They all have multiple roles too. And so again, when we look at this through a metabolic standpoint, if we don't have the available energy to convert, of course, we're going to have mood swings. We're going to have irritability, difficulty sleeping, cravings, forgetfulness. The brain weighs 2% of our body, but it takes 25% of our available energy. And so if, right, the parts of the brain that need that energy to keep the body in homeostasis don't have that available energy and aren't able to, because the parts that create that energy are responding to an increase of ROS or other, cortisol, however you want to label it, flushing of things that it can't flush out. Are we really looking at a mental health concern? Are we really looking at something being wrong in your mind or emotionally speaking, when in all actuality, again, going back to that quote at the very beginning, the invitation is literally in ourselves. So that's where we have to start. I kind of said all of this already, but ATP, and we'll again go into this in some other weeks. It doesn't demand just movement, right? So I know I talked about like moving away from the threat and things like that. We're going to touch on nervous system tone, muscle tension, immune activity, endocrine, behavioral outputs. Like all of these things come together to help support energy. Because again, if we're taking all that information in and you consider that galaxy, right? One thing, one shift, one change in that galaxy is going to change everything. So it's not this isolation of repair this, add this, fix this, right? Because everything acts together within its own ecosystem. So again, rather than calling the stress response a disorder, can we look at it as just a response? An alarm, an alert that signals something a lot deeper. And like I said, we'll cover those various inputs during weeks 5 through 9. I want to guide you guys through with a couple minutes. We have just a quick exercise. This is called scope. And you can do this literally anytime. The idea is to move out of that cortisol piece, to allow yourself a level of regulation for a moment. So I'm going to ask both of you and anyone who listens to this later just to stand up. S is slow, C is contain, O is orient, P is pendulate, E is engage. So the slow, we're going to walk, okay? And I want you to walk very slowly. And something to consider as you walk, I want you to mindfully make sure that your big toe touches the ground in all 4 corners, okay? Your big toe from a reflexology standpoint is connected to the pituitary gland. And that pituitary gland is part of the HPA axis. So walk as slow as you can, really feeling and pushing away from the earth with all 4 corners of that toe. Beautiful. Go ahead and stop. Wherever you find yourself, C is contain. I want you just to give yourself a hug. Feel yourself in energetic relationship with yourself. Squeeze as hard as you want or as light as you want, but feel that containment. Beautiful. Now we're going to orient. So I want you to look at something that is relatively farther away, maybe even looking outside. And then I want you to look at something that's closer to you. And then just go back and forth slowly. This is allowing us, we're going to go into deceptions in a couple weeks, but this allows us internally, innately, to recognize where we are in time and space. It lets us bring information and aspects in from the environment that help us recognize that we are in connection or that it is safe to move into connection. Wherever you are, go ahead and do that on the other side. Like even if you're, if you're looking to your right, now look over to your left and do that on the same side, or do it in front of you or behind you, but pick another direction that's opposite of the direction that you were just looking, if possible. Well, When you're ready for pendulate, you can keep your eyes open doing this or you can close them. I want you to find a spot in your body that feels open. So that's your chest, your stomach, your back, maybe your big toe. Find a spot that just feels good enough, feels open, feels safe enough. And then find a spot that maybe has a little tension, a little grit to it. And I just want you to move your awareness between the two, staying in each one for a couple of seconds, but noticing what it feels like to be in that openness, whatever part of the body. Then moving your awareness to the next part of the body that maybe has a little more tension, tightness, stickiness to it. Then go back to the other one. Go back to that openness. You go back to the other body part. And every time you go back to the one that felt sticky or feels sticky, just notice if and how it's changing. And then E is engage, which means when you are ready, you can go back to whatever it was you were engaging with to start with. Maybe you do this between sessions, phone calls, clients, meetings. How was that? Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Did you notice anything when you became aware of your big toe? Like anything else in your body? Because the first time I did it, I just felt this like ripple through my head. I know that sounds like really, really weird. I'm in a body work class, just learning anatomy with a dear friend of mine. And she did this as a demonstration a couple weeks ago. When I did it, I was like, wow, I just feel like my whole body, like, I don't know, connected in a way that
I'm gonna have to do that more.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I'm gonna have to keep doing it. I feel like when I first did it, I felt very grounded and connected. I think, you're like, I feel like I'm not really thinking about that movement. So to be able to like really focus in on a specific body part too, I was like, oh wow, like I'm very grounded right now.
Mhm. Good.
Yeah, that definitely sounds more similar to how I felt it too.
I'm glad. I'm glad. We've got a couple minutes left. That's the end of this week. There were a lot more slides than the next ones. But any questions? I want to be cognizant of both of your guys' time. So if you have to hop off and go into another call, I completely respect that. But if you have any questions, definitely feel free. No, no question.
No, just thank you for doing this. I feel like you're so in alignment with what you're meant to be doing. And it's really cool to like, I feel it.
Thanks.
So just know that, like, thank you for hosting these. It's so cool to like you said, we're never educated about these topics. And it's just really cool to kind of see behind the curtain.
Mhm. Oh, there's going to be a lot of seeing behind the curtain. In a lot of ways, in a lot of ways. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I love teaching. I've taught a few community college classes in psychology, and it was pre-COVID, and then COVID did everything online, and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. But I love this stuff. So thank you for saying that.
Oh,
For
well,
sure.
you're a great teacher. I know it's probably a lot of information, but I felt like I was able to keep up pretty well. So
Good.
thank
Okay.
you.
Good. Good. I try to make it as digestible as possible. So for you guys and just the people that are watching later real fast, I'm gonna try to have all recordings up within 24 hours. I'm gonna send the members a email from my email because I know the Flow Desk email sometimes go in promotion, so I don't want you guys to miss it. With the links to the folders, so like all the Kundalini will be in one folder, all of these will be in one folder. The Thursday immersions will be in another folder. Office hours will be in another. So I'll put at least the Monday and Tuesday because I have those for this one ready to go in an email. And then I'll also add a link to office hours and a link to because that's not on the schedule thing with the membership, I realized. People can sign up a la carte, and I don't want anyone signing up a la carte for that. So I'll drop that into the email as well, along with the Google link to the document. So if as we go you have questions, right, you can drop those in there. Those can be answered during office hours. It can also be a place too where don't think of office hours as just questions for this, because even last night, right, when we did yoga, there were pieces that I was like, talk about it tomorrow. But even our, the sixth chakra meditation we did last night was for the pituitary gland, and that's what we highlighted today. So as you have these experiences, please, whether that is sharing or inviting questions. Well, it's like, well, I had this experience here and you said this here. So how do these things come together? Like, feel free to ask that kind of stuff. Because even, in 2 nights when we go into some of the immersions, I mean, the topics and intentions are geared towards some of these pieces, but again, whatever is meant to come up in those comes up. So everyone will have different experiences, but I invite that, as you have these experiences, if certain questions come up for you that will help you connect the dots, big picture, please do not be afraid to put those in. The questions that make me think and AI can't answer, I think are the best. So with that, I'll send everyone an email later, but thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
see you guys later. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.